On the morning of a day, a girl remained alone at home for a short while, then disappeared without leaving a trace. What happened afterwards seemed more like a scene from an exciting detective novel than a real-life event. It was hard to believe that such a thing could actually happen. It took 15 whole years before the truth was finally revealed, and when it did, a wave of anger and shock swept through everyone's hearts. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in Shepherdsville, a small, quiet town in the U.S. state of Kentucky, a place where everyone knew each other, where agriculture was the main livelihood, and where a sense of security was a natural part of daily life. Jessica was the oldest sister to 2 younger brothers, and from an early age, she helped her parents care for them while they were busy working. Jessica grew up independent, and her parents placed many of their hopes on her. When she turned 15, she got a part-time job at a local restaurant, not just for the money, but as part of a bigger dream, owning her first car. She had her eyes set on a red Pontiac. Over the years, she saved enough money to make that dream come true. Despite her work commitments, she remained an excellent student with clear ambitions to attend college and study accounting after graduation. By the fall of 1999, Jessica was 17 and had started her final year of high school. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, her day began like any other. Her parents left for work while she was still asleep, followed by her brothers heading to the bus stop. Jessica stayed behind. She was supposed to wake up soon and drive herself to school. When her mother returned home around noon, she felt something was wrong. Jessica's car was still parked outside. It should have been at school by then. Her mother went to Jessica's room, worry growing in her chest. She thought Jessica had maybe overslept and missed her morning class. But Jessica wasn't there. She called her husband to ask if he had taken Jessica to school, but the answer was shocking. He had gone to work alone that morning. The mother tried to convince herself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the car had broken down. She took a spare key and went to check it, but she wasn't prepared for what she saw. The driver's door was slightly open. On the seat was Jessica's cell phone, with the emergency number dialed, but the call was never completed. One of Jessica's shoes was under the seat, along with her keys. In the back seat were her school books, work clothes, and purse. Everything was still there. Her mother didn't need more to realize that something terrible had happened. It didn't make sense that Jessica would leave all her belongings behind and walk away, especially not without shoes, and especially not through the remote outskirts of town. In a desperate attempt to find answers, Jessica's parents called the school and discovered she had never shown up that day. To make things worse, the school hadn't even bothered to contact them about her absence, as they were supposed to. Hours passed, and the worry deepened. Then they received another call, from Jessica's close friend and co-worker at the restaurant, saying she hadn't shown up to work either. Everything was pointing to the fact that something was wrong. Jessica had left behind everything she owned, hadn't gone to school or work, and hadn't contacted anyone. At that moment, her parents made the heartbreaking decision to call the police. But their reception was disappointing. The sheriff, showing obvious indifference, simply said Jessica had probably gone for a walk and would come back later. He didn't care that her shoes, keys, and phone were left in the car. He didn't care that Jessica was a responsible girl who wouldn't just leave without a word. He didn't even care about the desperation in her parents' voices as they begged him to start an investigation. Forced to return home, drowning in worry, the parents decided to take matters into their own hands. They contacted relatives, friends, and neighbors. They searched the streets, the fields, and the roads, but Jessica was nowhere to be found. At sunrise the next day, they returned to the police station, this time more determined. They told the sheriff Jessica was still missing, and every passing minute could be critical. Finally, the sheriff sent 2 officers to inspect Jessica's car. But once again, disappointment awaited them. The officers checked the car carelessly. They didn't wear gloves or avoid contaminating the scene. They touched everything with their bare hands, turning the car into a contaminated crime scene with little forensic value. And the negligence didn't stop there. They didn't even bother to search Jessica's room, a basic procedure in any missing person case. Frustrated, Jessica's parents turned to the local media. They exposed the police's failure and pleaded with the public for help. With the support of family and friends, they launched a wide search campaign. Posters with Jessica's photo and description covered the town, but the days passed, and Jessica remained missing. Jessica's father and brother Stanley led the search effort. They knew the area's terrain well. Fearing the worst, they focused their search around a local river known for its bad reputation. It was a haven for drug dealers and criminals, isolated, overgrown with thick vegetation, and dangerous to search. 4 hours, father and son scoured the rough ground, checking every corner, but found no trace of Jessica. The next morning, something strange happened. Jessica's younger brother was playing outside when he suddenly rushed into the house, pale and shaking, claiming he heard a cry for help from nearby, a scream that sounded like his missing sister's. Jessica's father didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and rushed out, searching with eyes and ears alert. Just then, Stanley arrived and joined the search. As they moved, they noticed something odd, smoke rising from their neighbor's property. The neighbor was David Brooks, a man in his 40s. As they got closer, they saw him burning something that looked like clothing. The behavior immediately raised suspicions. With calm determination, Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his land. But Brooks flatly refused, insisting on his privacy. Brooks' behavior was disturbing, and not just because of the burning. Before Jessica's disappearance, relations had been normal. But afterward, he began driving slowly past their house, staring at them with a creepy smile. The family also began receiving silent phone calls from a man. Only heavy breathing could be heard on the other end. Suspicion was growing around Brooks, but his motive remained unclear. Jessica's parents went back to the police, hoping this time their concerns would be taken seriously. They gave detailed observations and insisted the police bring search dogs to Brooks' farm. The police finally agreed. Using Jessica's old clothes to give the dogs her scent, they were led directly to the fire pit on Brooks' property. But no solid evidence was found. However, the dogs did find a pair of black gloves in a shed with a strong smell, suggesting decomposition. Despite these worrying signs, the police still couldn't find concrete evidence linking Brooks to Jessica's disappearance. The search ended with nothing. The police left, and the family was left boiling with anger and frustration. At that point, Jessica's father reached out to the FBI. Normally, the agency hesitates to get involved based only on family suspicions, but the evidence he provided was disturbing enough for them to act. Once involved, FBI agents launched a serious investigation. They collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car and sent all possible evidence to forensic labs. They organized large search operations using helicopters and recruited volunteers from all over the region. They even searched the nearby pond, fearing they might find her body. During a detailed search of Brooks' farm, they found something chilling, a printed photo of Jessica inside a shed. This discovery confirmed to investigators that Brooks was likely involved in her disappearance. Brooks wasn't the only suspect. His brother, Joseph, 35, also drew suspicion with his nervous and erratic behavior during the searches. Still, without legal proof, investigators couldn't arrest either man. They intensified the search, convinced that Jessica was likely no longer alive. The days dragged on, until September 27, 17 days after Jessica went missing, the police received an unexpected phone call. A woman was driving her car near the river where Jessica's father had searched in the early days, when she noticed something strange near a tree by the roadside. Her instincts pushed her to get closer, and there she saw what looked like a human body. She immediately called the police. FBI agents arrived at the scene quickly, and under the thick shadows of the trees, they found the body of a young woman. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, missing some fingers and limbs, and her legs were tied with a rope that showed traces of red and silver paint. The absence of some clothing led investigators to suspect that the victim had been sexually assaulted. It was not possible to identify the body immediately due to its condition, which led to a painful and harsh step. Officers went to Jessica's family home, asking one of the parents to help identify the body. Jessica's father could not bear to face the horrific scene, so her mother, with a heart full of sorrow and fear, agreed to take on the dreadful task. At first, when the detective arrived at the crime scene, she could not identify the victim. The scene was confusing and shrouded in mystery. But soon, she noticed a small butterfly tattoo on the victim's body, an identical tattoo to the one her daughter had, in the same spot. It didn't take long for medical experts to confirm the victim's identity. It was Jessica. The cause of death was strangulation. Her body showed numerous bruises and clear signs of horrific suffering. Then came the revelation that made the scene even more painful. The victim's limbs and fingers had been cut off, but experts confirmed this happened post-mortem, meaning she endured the terror in full during her final moments. Still, this wasn't the most heartbreaking discovery. Medical reports revealed that Jessica had remained alive for about 3 days after her disappearance. 3 days during which the police could have saved her if they had acted in time, but they didn't. After the body was discovered, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, the man who had been under suspicion from the beginning. In his initial statement, Brooks claimed he saw Jessica near her house the morning she disappeared. But this time, he changed his story. He denied seeing her at all and insisted he was asleep in bed with his wife. When his wife was brought in for questioning, her story contradicted his. Investigators increased the pressure and asked Brooks what he would do if his fingerprints were found on the victim's body. His response was shocking and suspicious. He said that in that case, he would have to confess everything. There were no fingerprints, in fact, but his strange response raised more doubts than ever. Later, Brooks failed a polygraph test. There was no escape. The FBI decided to arrest him and proceed to trial, despite knowing the evidence against him was weak, merely concerning indicators, but no definitive proof. During the trial preparations, investigators continued working, looking for anything that could strengthen the case. While reviewing the evidence, they recalled a compelling detail. During the search of Brooks' car, a rope was found similar to the one used to tie the victim's legs. But once again, the lab analysis was disappointing. No DNA was found on the rope, just another circumstantial clue, nothing more. Then came the trial, in January 2003. Brooks' lawyer was sharp and confident. He emphasized the lack of evidence and insisted on his client's innocence. In court, another disaster unfolded. When Jessica's body was found, some of her severed limbs were also discovered nearby, placed in special containers and handed over to the police. But the police ignored strict instructions to store the containers in a refrigerator. Instead, they left the evidence at room temperature, causing it to deteriorate and decay to the point where no DNA could be extracted. A potentially crucial piece of evidence was lost forever. With no conclusive evidence and a prosecution relying solely on circumstantial evidence, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. The outcome was painful. Brooks was acquitted. According to local laws, he could not be retried unless new evidence emerged. It was a devastating blow to Jessica's family. They never doubted for a second that Brooks was behind her murder. Yet they felt the true cause of their loss, and the failure to achieve justice, was the police's gross negligence. Hope was gone, leaving only pain. Years passed, and the case of Jessica Dishon faded into oblivion. The investigation seemed like something that never happened, until 2012, when Detective Lynn Hunt joined the city's police department. She was assigned to review cold cases, starting with the murder of Jessica. As she reviewed the case files, Hunt couldn't believe what she saw: records full of errors, incomplete reports, and improperly documented evidence. She had no choice but to start from scratch, despite 13 years having passed since the crime. Her first step was to meet Jessica's family. One of her brothers, who had moved away, handed her a small box containing Jessica's belongings that had been in her car at the time of her disappearance. He had kept them since the police returned them to the family. Hunt realized the magnitude of the disaster once again. These belongings had never been treated as forensic evidence. Another chance to gather clues had been lost. Despite all the obstacles, Hunt pressed on. She examined every paper, every document, until she made another shocking discovery. Brooks' psychological evaluation revealed that his IQ was only 61, extremely low. Hunt realized how critical this number was. With such a low IQ, Brooks may not have even understood the nature of the questions during interrogation. His strange behavior could have been the result of mental disability, not evidence of guilt. For the first time, Hunt began to wonder, what if Brooks was innocent? She launched a wide-reaching investigation involving everyone who had been close to Jessica or connected to the incident. Every day, she moved a step closer to the truth. Hunt kept digging until September 2014, almost 15 years after Jessica Dishon's murder. Perhaps justice was about to be revived. Detective Hunt's phone rang. On the line was a colleague from another department with information that could turn the case on its head. In a voice filled with cautious excitement, he told her that a prisoner in a Kentucky state prison claimed to know the true identity of Jessica Dishon's killer. Hunt couldn't ignore the call, though skepticism was her first instinct. In her line of work, she had learned that many inmates fabricate stories hoping for reduced sentences or better prison conditions. But her golden rule was never to overlook a lead, no matter how weak it seemed. So she decided to visit the prison herself to meet the man. In the visiting room, Hunt sat across from the prisoner, her expression alert. He began to tell his story. He said he had spent time in a shared cell with a man convicted of child molestation, just like him. This disturbing commonality built a twisted bond of trust between them. Bit by bit, the two men exchanged horrific confessions about their crimes. One night, during a casual conversation, his cellmate confessed to killing Jessica Dishon. Hunt listened carefully, but what the prisoner said next was a bombshell. The man who confessed to the crime was Stanley Dishon, Jessica's uncle. According to the prisoner, Stanley had been sexually abusing Jessica throughout her teenage years while he was living in the family home. He threatened to kill her or harm her loved ones if she ever dared to speak out. When Jessica started dating a young man in the spring of 1999, Stanley was overcome with fear that she might tell him the truth. On the morning of September 10th, he snuck into the family's home while Jessica was alone. She was outside, about to get into her car with her belongings already inside. He approached her and demanded she end her relationship with her boyfriend. Jessica stood her ground and told him she would expose him if he didn't leave her alone. The threats escalated, and in fear, Jessica tried to call the police. That's when Stanley attacked her. She managed to break free and run inside the house, but he followed her into a room, beat her, and tied her with bed sheets. He then carried her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body was later found. In the darkness of that forgotten shed, Stanley kept Jessica alive for several days, torturing her and abusing her, before finally ending her life in a brutal manner. Later, he moved her body to a visible spot by the roadside and buried the sheets under the shed in an attempt to hide the evidence. To further confuse investigators, he mutilated parts of her body, hoping to mislead the police. Detective Hunt stared at the prisoner, her mind racing. These details had never been publicly released, only someone very close to Jessica could have known them. It seemed impossible that this inmate had made it all up. The man added that Stanley had hidden Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed, another detail that had to be verified. Despite the local police department being understaffed, Hunt didn't let circumstances stop her. She enlisted Jessica's brother and other relatives to help organize a secret search operation. She didn't tell them they were investigating Stanley. She was determined to find solid evidence first, before dropping such a devastating revelation. The first day of the search was disappointing. Under heavy rain, they scoured the areas described by the inmate to no avail. But on the second day, as Hunt and Jessica's brother made their way to the site, once again, the abandoned barn near the road caught her attention. She headed toward it cautiously. With the first few blows of the axe into the wet soil, the long-awaited breakthrough was achieved. They found a buried bedsheet. With trembling hands, Hunt collected the evidence and went directly to Jessica's house. Inside Jessica's room, time had stood still since her disappearance. Her parents hadn't changed a thing, as if she was still there. From these small details, Hunt was able to confirm. The sheet they had found was part of Jessica's bedding. Same pattern, same fabric, and that exact piece was missing from her bed. There was no time to waste. Stanley Dishon was arrested. In the interrogation room, he appeared composed on the surface, but his nervousness betrayed him with every question. He denied the crime, but the evidence was starting to pile up against him, and the case was referred to the court. Jessica's father, who had always trusted his brother, found himself drowning in a storm of denial. How could his brother be the killer of his only daughter? How had he lived beside him all these years without knowing? But over time, and under the weight of the evidence, he had to confront the bitter truth. When the father recalled the early days of Jessica's disappearance, he remembered how Stanley had insisted on searching near the river. He also recalled how suddenly Stanley claimed exhaustion and asked to return home. At the time, nothing seemed suspicious. But now, it was clear. The abandoned barn, just a few hundred meters from the search area, was where Jessica had been held while she was still alive. Stanley had deliberately diverted them away from the site. As the trial approached, Hunt reopened Stanley's dark past looking for more evidence. She already knew about a previous conviction for assaulting another young girl in the family. But what she uncovered next was even more horrifying. Other female relatives came forward and gave testimonies to the police. Their stories were disturbingly identical. Stanley, who always claimed he needed temporary shelter, moved from one relative's home to another. And once the opportunity arose, he would assault the young girls. His weapon was silence, enforced through threats. 3 decades, 30 years, of horrific abuse remained hidden until Jessica's murder revealed everything. Despite all efforts, Hunt knew securing a murder conviction wouldn't be easy. There was no conclusive evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA. Still, she didn't give up. She kept digging into every detail of the case until her persistence led her to a dusty old box full of files she hadn't reviewed before. As she flipped through the papers, a new wave of frustration swept over her. Disappointment in her colleagues who had handled the case with shocking negligence. Among the files, she found a letter dated June 26, 2002. A letter that could have changed the course of the investigation if only someone had paid attention. It was written by an informant who had heard the exact same story Hunt heard more than a decade later, from another inmate in Kentucky. In the summer of 2002, Stanley was already behind bars, serving a sentence for assaulting a minor family member. In the cold prison cells, he opened up to his cellmate and confessed to the horrific murder of Jessica. That cellmate was not just any prisoner, he was a police informant. He immediately wrote a detailed letter to the department investigating the case, describing the crime in detail. Details only the killer would know. But what did the police do? They ignored the letter. Perhaps they had already convinced themselves that Brooks was the culprit, and didn't bother to consider any other suspects. Hunt was furious. The lack of professionalism, the gross negligence, perhaps even a missed chance at justice over a decade earlier. If they had just done their jobs, Jessica might have gotten justice back in 2002. Now, years later, Hunt could only wait for the trial to begin, hoping Stanley would finally be held accountable. In 2015, the trial began. Stanley stood in court and pleaded not guilty. Jessica's parents sat in the courtroom, staring at the relative who had destroyed their lives. They could barely look at him. The anger in their hearts wasn't just over what he did, but that he still refused to admit it, to give them even a small sense of closure. Despite the prosecution's determination, they knew getting a conviction for murder would be hard. The absence of physical evidence made the task nearly impossible. And then there were the complex cases of assault against other girls in the family. Those victims had to take the stand, confront Stanley publicly, and expose his horrors in painful detail. Because of all this, the prosecution decided to offer a plea deal, drop the death penalty in exchange for Stanley's confession to both the assaults and Jessica's murder. After negotiations, Stanley accepted the deal. He confessed, but under harsh conditions. He was not required to reveal any details of his crimes. Jessica's parents were devastated. They wanted the full truth. They needed to know what had happened to their daughter. But Stanley remained chillingly silent. Under the agreement, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. He was 56 years old at the time. If released, he would be in his 70s. This wasn't the justice Jessica's parents wanted. It wasn't enough. After the trial, Jessica's father broke his silence and publicly vowed that if his brother ever got out of prison, he would be waiting for him to deliver justice himself. In 2019, Stanley appeared from behind bars for the first time to give a media interview. He claimed he was innocent. He said he had been at work on the morning Jessica disappeared. But after 20 years, that claim could no longer be verified. What raised even more suspicion was that two unrelated informants gave matching accounts of the murder. Details only someone involved could know, like the exact burial site of the bedsheet that had covered Jessica's body. As for David Brooks, suspicions about him lingered. Investigators didn't rule out his involvement. Stanley knew Brooks. Maybe he asked for his help in disposing of Jessica's belongings. Brooks, with his low IQ, might not have realized the gravity of what he was doing. Maybe he was the one who burned Jessica's clothes, or the one who received the gloves that still carried her scent, the ones later found by police dogs. Some even speculated that Brooks deliberately left Jessica's photo in Stanley's shed to implicate him. But the full truth may never be known. Brooks died in 2021 from heart problems, taking the secrets of that fateful night with him to the grave. Of all the haunting details in this case, one moment stands out. On the third day of Jessica's disappearance, her younger brother heard a scream coming from outside. He was convinced it was his sister's cry for help. To this day, no one can say for sure what happened. Maybe Jessica was still alive then, held in a barn just a few miles from home. Or maybe her little brother was just overwhelmed with fear and pressure. Or maybe something else happened that night. Stanley arrived at the family home just minutes after the scream. He was extremely close. Was Jessica in his car that night, gagged or unconscious? A terrifying theory, but one that sadly remains highly unlikely. What do you think, dear viewers? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this story compelling. Thank you for watching. Until next time.